Steve's going to talk about how we go from insight to influence with people analytics, and particularly how, as a function, we can quantify our value to the CHRO. So, Steve, over to you.
They photoshopped my head a little bit there, and it doesn't quite look like that. I need to get an updated headshot, so the next conference I go to, that's going to be a priority for me. My name's Steve. I lead our solution consulting and strategy teams at Visier. If you don't know who Visier is, we'll talk a little bit about it, but we're a people analytics platform. We've actually kind of rebranded a little bit. We think we're calling ourselves a workforce platform now. It's kind of funny. When we started the company, we were workforce analytics. We went to people analytics, and now I think workforce is really important. And I'll talk a little bit about why the word work is in there and why I think workforce is an important word. This audience is a very mature audience generally, so I'm going to start pretty high level. So bear with me as I walk into a story that takes us from the high level of some of the challenges we face as an industry and as a function, and then drill into some of the ideas we have on how to move from insight to influence. I was talking to David yesterday after his presentation, and if you remember David's presentation, he said the 8 influencing factors. The number 2, I think, or 1 was influence. How does the PA function start to get influence? So I'm going to share some ideas we have on influence. We're going to talk a little bit. There was a question in the prior conversation about work data and what the role of business data is. We like to say people data is business data, and I think sometimes we lose sight of that, but we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And I think I'm going to close with just, I have to say something about AI. I don't think you could be at an analytics or people data conference without talking a little bit about AI, but I'm going to take a different approach. I'm not going to talk about agents and chatbots. I'm going to talk about the impact AI has on us as PA practitioners, because I think there is a pending impact, and it was alluded to in the prior session as well. So that's my rough talk, some high-level metrics around the influence that HR is having on the business, and then we'll get into some ideas of how do you move to add more value to the function. So let's get into it. This is a marketing slide that our marketing team built. I think this one's kind of interesting because organizations are being asked to grow and to build more and do more with less. Has anybody ever heard that? Do more with less? Has anybody done a riff or anything in the last 24 months? That means you're ultimately doing more with less, right? And so ultimately, we have these unrealistic or these massive growth expectations, and we're being asked to have better employee engagement, to increase productivity, and to create our talent density or really refine our talent pool. And if you think about that from a workforce perspective, that's really HR's job, right? Our job is to ensure that we've got good talent density, that we're being productive. And I think as a people analytics function, and again, Richard talked about this prior, there's a lot of pieces where like we're just getting headcount, right? Like a lot of people analytics functions are delivering headcount. That's amazing. That's success. And I think we're going to have to challenge ourselves. For those of you that are more mature, absolutely, you're doing the right things, but we need to continue to challenge the status quo and start to connect into that productivity angle and those engagement angles and so on. So this is, we call this the business erosion crisis or business performance erosion crisis. Again, a lot of time went into those words. I think they're very interesting words, but I do believe that growth expectations are not going away. We have to do more with less, and our people are our most critical asset. I think COVID changed something about the contract between a company and their employees. I felt it. I changed during COVID. I came to Visier during COVID, and I think that the nature of what the employee has to bring to the table, it means that these 3 things are super important as time goes on. This next slide is the share of firms with a top 5 paid executive in HR from 1992 to today. It's gone up from almost nothing to about 20% of Fortune or S&P 1500 companies where one of the top highest paid executives is HR. That is amazing, because what that means is our influence is growing at the executive suite, and the value of what HR does for the business is being seen in not only in compensation, but just in terms of the market as a whole. What does that mean for us? I think it means that our value and our people analytics function, no longer will we have to compete with the finance analytic function and the supply chain analytic function and the customer analytic function. We are now, not to say we have a seat at the table, I hate that word, but I think the value of HR is increasing exponentially. I grabbed this slide from a company called Greenfield. You can't see the icons. You're not intended to read all the icons, but the amount of data that you all have access to is exploding. Everybody has more systems than they can shake a stick at. You're collecting more information. There was a question in the earlier panel about exit surveys and stay surveys. Like, we don't have a dearth of data, right? Like, we have more data than we can shake a stick at. And I think when you think about that, when you start to connect those signals and when you start to pull all the HR, and by the way, that's just HR data. You got TA, you got experience, you got comp and ben, you've got analytic platforms, you've got hundreds of data points that you're probably working within. And it poses a unique challenge, right? That number on the right, I love that stat. It's from our friends at Sapient Research. The average number of systems that you have to integrate is about 10. That's across all enterprises. It's a little higher in large enterprise, a little lower in small enterprise, but that's 10 distinct HR systems that you can use to drive productivity, increase engagement, and really add value to your CHRO and your managers and leaders across the organization. So, we need to start thinking about the workforce data, but not in isolation, because collecting the data and collating it and cleansing it, that's just the beginning of the journey. You have to have that as a foundational investment. I am not an HR professional. I am not a people analytics expert. I came from the general purpose analytics. I sold risk analytics and customer analytics and every other kind of analytic other than people analytic. And I'm always amazed at dashboards being the end of the journey. How many people have a dashboard? Everybody's got a dashboard. Richard's in the room, so I'm gonna steal. Richard talked about the little red hen. If you ever read the book, If You Give a Mouse a Cookie, it's a children's book. If you give a mouse a cookie, they'll ask you for some milk. If you give them a glass of milk, they're gonna ask you for a straw. If you give them a straw, they're gonna ask you for something else. And I think that's the world that dashboards create for all of us. Every time you publish a new dashboard, you probably have some questions about it. You probably maybe leave people wondering, like, where am I underperforming? Do I have an issue? What action do I take? What do I do about this thing being out of alignment? I think it's one of my colleagues talks about the dashboard on your car. Like, that's literally where the term dashboard came from. When a light goes off on your dashboard on the car, what do? You take it to the dealership, right? And I think you guys are you all are the dealership, right? You get the call that says, what does that light mean? What do I do about it? What context does the people analytics function, the HR function, provide to leaders to help them answer the question and take an action? And I think, again, this is a pretty mature audience, so you probably have declared success on a dashboard a long time ago. But as we evolve and push insights out to the business, dashboards is not the end of the journey. It's the beginning in my mind, or it's table stakes so that you can surface insights. But how do you move those insights into something more meaningful, more influential, more action-oriented? So dashboards are not the end. I'm going to show this slide here, which I think this is my view of the people data platform work or the people analytics work. So at the bottom, you have source identification. Everybody has to reconcile 10 systems, whatever, figuring out where your core system is, which is the influencing system. You've got to collect that data. Some people may call that ETL, extraction, whatever, 100 names for it. But you've got to then take that data out and collect it. You got to clean it, right? By the way, I love, as a vendor who sells people analytics, I love it when people say, oh, we have dirty data. I kind of say join the club. Like, I've never met an organization that doesn't have messy data. And that's just the nature. And I tell customers stories. I say, like, you can sit and worry about your data being bad quality, just like I complain about not being fit, but I don't go to the gym. So how can I expect to clean my data if I don't start exercising it? It's the same as my body, right? How do I expect to get fit if I don't go to the gym? And I think as people analytics practitioners, you probably have to fight this battle all the time. I'm worried about my source system. I got to wait till my Workday transformation is complete before I can start collecting data. It's like, you probably should start now because you're not getting any younger and you're not getting any fitter sitting on the couch eating chips. That's my wife's story to me. That's my story to you. So data cleansing is a key piece. You got to get your data right. You need to exercise your data. Then you need to organize it and model it. And your enterprise architects in the room, your IT colleagues will tell you about their Snowflake instance, which is going to solve world hunger. By the way, it used to be called a data warehouse and it ran on Oracle. Then it was a data lake and it ran on Hadoop. And now it's a data lakehouse that runs on Snowflake. I've been in the industry too many years to talk about, and the problem still exists because organizing and modeling your data is an important part of the process. And if you don't know what data you're looking for, that model becomes increasingly important. The other thing that I'll double down on what Richard said, people data is different, right? How many of your CFOs backdate transactions on a regular basis? Your CFOs backdate transactions? Most CFOs don't backdate transactions. Sorry, I wasn't clear on my question. But HR, we do it all the time. I think I have backdated transaction in my organization, like with promotions and pay increases, and I forgot to do their review, so I better do that now. Like, it happens all the time. Go to your IT colleagues and say, how are you going to deal with my backdated transactions in your star schema data warehouse running on Redshift? And they're gonna look at you funny. People data is different too in that there's an expectation, there's an agreement with the employee that says this data needs to be treated differently. How many people are comfortable with their salary being shared across the organization? Not many. Some organizations have great pay transparency. I think we're going to go to that, by the way. I think that's going to be the norm. If you follow the EU legislation at all, you know that that's coming. But I think employees aren't there yet. So people data is different. And I think just having an organization and model that makes it make sense is something we all have to push for. And a general purpose database and analytic model is not going to get you there. Then we do data analysis. That's a lot of our job, right? How many people do ad hoc requests from their CHRO, or, hey, I'm going into the board meeting. Can you get me a deck that tells me these 5 things? And you spend all weekend munging data. Then maybe you do a dashboard. That's awesome. And then this is the top bit. And I have a story here. I'm not just telling you stuff you already know, but the top bit's really, really important. How do you provide the context for why this is important? Many of you may be IO psychologists. Many of you may be data scientists. Many of you may be deep HR experts. You can give that business context. AI is not going to do that. Now, it might get close, but you still should check its work. How do you communicate the insight? How do you present the findings? How do you then develop an action plan? And so I highlight this data analytics pipeline or people analytics pipeline because I have a fairly provocative statement that I'm going to go. And I have 2 actually. The first statement is about 80% of most people analytics time is spent doing that teal colored stuff, organizing, munging, building out the data. Now, you might be at 60. I doubt you're at 50, but some percentage of your time is being spent to that, and it's the vast majority. We have this new tagline for our company called the Workforce AI Edge. And the AI is in there purposefully because I think AI is going to disrupt all work. And it's going to disrupt our work as well. And so we need to question ourselves as a people analytics function, what is our value with AI? Is our AI data wrangling? Or is our value data wrangling? Maybe. Maybe not. If you watch some of the, I know what my company's working on. If you look at any of the data ETL companies, there's a time and a place where AI might be better at wrangling data than we are. Provocative, yes. Reality, maybe not, but think about it. Is our value writing SQL codes or building dashboards? No. Like, I've been writing SQL for 20 years, and it can be automated. Might not be perfect, but it'll get you 90% there. So all of a sudden, our value moves from writing SQL, building data views, writing visualizations, to what? And I think we've got to start to challenge. I was on a panel last week with Cole and a couple of people who might be in this room, and we talked about what's the impact AI is going to have on people analytics. And I think our function is going to change, and what we do every day could change. And so when I talk about this, on the left-hand side, your data pipeline and having your data organized is necessary, but it's not sufficient for the function. You need some form of a platform that distributes insights. So you need that stuff that you've now organized and cleansed and got right to be able to be communicated and distributed out to the world. And I think on the right-hand side I think we're going to become business advisors. We're going to become people who provide the business context on top of that data. Some of us will still write code. I write code. I like writing code. It gives me a great sense of satisfaction because it's tangible. I know that it worked, and I feel like a thrill from it. Call me a nerd. I apologize, but I do that. But you've also got to be able to put that business context on top of it. And I think as we think about the topic of my talk is moving from insight to influence, what a better way to be influential, right? Have the business context. Have the insight interpretation. And, we all are going to see chatbots that are going to tell you what the data says, but I think everybody's going to have human oversight on people decisions. And I think for me, that's where our function needs to continue to evolve. So that's a little bit of provocative thought, maybe. I don't know. I think some of us are there, some of us are not. But I think the move from insight to influence is critical. So now you say to me, okay, Steve, that's great, but we're already there, maybe. We're getting there. And I want to share with you kind of 3 ways or 3 ideas. And it's been a bit of a theme through the last, 48 hours that I've seen is there's some reasons why we fail. And failure is maybe a strong word, where we don't get the full value we realize. I have to change the slide. I don't like the word failure. It's negative consequences, right? I think there's a reason why we don't have as much influence as we'd like. And the first is executive sponsorship. And this was alluded to in a couple talks. I can't remember which one, but how many of the people in this room, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands, but report directly to the CHRO? Interesting, right? As a people analytics function, if you're reporting directly to the CHRO, you now have an executive sponsor. We see this all the time because we're working with you in the trenches, where how do you ensure that there's a senior leader who's aligned to the people analytics function, is going to resource it both from a people and a technology perspective to make sure you're successful? A lot of organizations struggle with that. Cole spoke about, is people analytics a luxury handbag? I don't think it is. I wouldn't be in the space if I did, but I think some people do. And if you don't have that executive sponsorship, that's going to make it difficult for you to go buy that luxury bag, right? Stakeholder input. So if your analytic products are not tied to HR and or business strategy, then your work is nice to have. I've seen this in day-to-day activity. Like, we have these amazing models, but I can't get the model off my desktop into people's hands so they can action it. And the ability to start to move that stuff out into the world is critical. And building an amazing dashboard that no one wants, now that's maybe I'm being a little bit dismissive, but I think it's really about aligning those business outputs and what are your leaders asking for? Some of the most successful PA practices I've seen have the leaders consuming insights directly without a proxy in HR, because you built the muscle memory, you've built the data foundation, you've built the trust and influence so that leaders will start to drive engagement from the work that you all do. Now, some of you may be there, some of you may not, but I think starting to get your external stakeholders engaged is important. And the last one, I think, speaks to the same thing a little bit. Impactful use of people data is still relatively young. It's true. Think about finance data. I've done a talk, and one of my colleagues has done a talk on, do we need to start thinking like a CFO? Like, how many of your CHROs come to the board meeting with data-centric decisions? The good news is a lot more than 5 years ago, but we're not all there yet. Can you imagine if your CFO came in, or your head of sales didn't come in with metrics and data to support their hypothesis? We have an engagement problem. How do we fix engagement? We do more surveys, right? Or we increase pay. No, you got to have data-driven decisions. So I think when you look at the spectrum of why are we sometimes a luxury handbag, lack of executive sponsorship, we haven't aligned to the business leadership, and we haven't focused on pushing those insights out into the world where they can be actioned. Now, again, kind of feels like first principles, but that's kind of the point of these talks, to say, measuring yourself against what others in the industry are doing and then level up or declare success. It's amazing. If you're doing all that, high five. You're a market-leading PA function. So how do we do this? How do we move? And this is branded the Vizier path. I don't love it being branded the Vizier path because I think it's just a path. And it's our interpretation and our thought leaders' interpretation of how do you build a framework that starts to solve people-related challenges, that takes the certainty out of the work the uncertainty out of the work that you do, and gives you a clear set of milestones that you can move within to not only influence the work that you do, but grow your scope of influence. This is hard to see. Don't worry about it. It's on our website. I'm going to walk through the 3 pillars in a little bit of detail. And the thing I want you to focus on is not the use cases, because these are just our interpretation. You have your own. You may have done some of these, I'm sure. I hope that all of you have done the ones in yellow, or a lot of them. But we're going to walk through how this works. So the first piece is the foundational impact. Okay? That's easy. Seems really simple. Know your people. Understand who they are. Understand where they work. Understand what they do. Retain them. How many people have a retention dashboard? Everybody, right? Thank you. Whew. I was touch and go there for a minute. I didn't know if everybody would have had one, but everybody does. That's amazing. Retention. Make sure you retain the right people. Not just the people, the right people. Understand your diversity. It's one of the number one use cases still in people analytics is helping to move the needle on your DEI initiatives. I think that's a critical use case. Have career conversations, increase internal mobility. It's always better to promote someone or move someone around than to lose them, right? It's the classic, it costs more to hire someone than it does to take someone who's already there. Ensure you're compensating fairly. That gets into the total rewards bucket. So we consider these kind of the basic foundational events that make any people analytics function get started. These are all table stakes. The middle one is then how do you start to broaden the people analytics function outside of the basics to start to drive what I call HR impact? So this is where you pull in things like talent acquisition data. How many people have amazing, clean, perfectly transformed data coming out of their ATS systems? How many people get, I love this because I think recruiters are a lot like salespeople. I deal with salespeople all day long, and recruiters are all like salespeople. I'm too busy. I just got to do this. Leave me alone. I don't want to open that rec. I'm just going to close the candidate, right? You ever had that happen? Where you have that ghost requisition or ghost candidate that got hired with no requisition? It happens. So I think TA is an area where we all dip our toe in the water and sometimes blows our brains in terms of the business process transformation we need to do over there. But I think TA is, in our experience, TA is the number one, after you get the foundation in place, TA is the number one place you go. You're starting to connect the employee journey to the candidate journey and the candidate skills and where they came from to your overall productivity and success becomes a really cool use case. Employee experience is another big one. I call managed total rewards because comp and total rewards is different, right? Are they using health benefits? Do they have long-term equity and things like that? Are they part of the share purchase plan? Total rewards is a bigger bucket of work than just compensation, which is actual and budgeted comp. We have skills gap. Skills is a hot topic, still remains. It remains a hot topic. I still think that if you ask everybody what skills means in this room, you're going to get 3 different answers or 50 different answers. But skills, start to understand your skills gap. What skills do you have? These are all use cases designed to help make your HR colleagues more effective, more productive. And then on the far right-hand side is business impact. So how do you increase productivity? How do you start to understand collaboration? How do you optimize for a hybrid work world? Again, bringing in maybe real estate data or badge scan data. And the bottom right-hand corner, I'll talk about this one a little bit, but the business results I think is critically important. So these are 3 horizons. They're not linear. You can start on the right-hand side if you want. You can start on the left-hand side if you want. But these are ways for you to think about your projects and the work that you do so you can incrementally add more influence to your portfolio. Because the days of having a headcount dashboard be success are behind us. So what does this look like? Again, I'm going to take one example and go into it a little bit of depth. Foundational impact, we talked about all these. Know your people, pretty simple. Know who is working for you and where. Can everybody do that? I think you can, right? Sometimes you don't know. Sometimes there's these random headcount that are in your organization. You don't know what they do, but that's an HCM issue. So what is the problem that you have to solve? It's really to help ensure stakeholders have the people capacity they need to deliver on the business goals. That's the outcome we're actually looking at. When we say know your people, we're actually trying to connect, do I have the bodies in place to do the work? And I think a lot of the time when we talk about people analytics, we forget about the work, right? Like we think a lot about the person, but we don't always connect it to the work. And then who generally needs this? CHRO, your CFO, maybe your CEO if they're really people-centric. But a lot of the time you want to understand kind of who's working where. This framework that we've got, we've also broken it down to say, what is the path to action? So on the right-hand side, your left, I apologize. No, you're right, sorry. Where do you get this data from? You get it from your HCM, generally. You need 4 or 5 simple things. You need the employee profile. You need hierarchies. You need starts, exits, and ideally with reasons. And you need performance data. Are they high performer, low performer? That's really simple, right? That's table stakes. the point of this conversation isn't to focus on how simplistic this is, but every one of your projects and every one of these hexagons has the same thing. What data do you need? And then what happens when you do that? What influence does it have if you analyze it correctly? So we say self-service to headcount trends, comparison, demographic insights, understanding company growth over time. There's a whole bunch of stuff we do that actually allows you to take the action of aligning your workforce with the current business objectives. I'm going through fiscal 26, which is our next year planning right now, and I had to present my plan to our CFO. I had to show how many heads I had, what the ratios were. I had to show where I thought we would have growth and what that growth was going to do. And as a leader, I had to use my people data to make that happen. The other one is to align HR and finance on a common statement of headcount. How many people ever have that discussion with headcount, with finance? Yeah. You know what I love about finance conversations is they give you a headcount, but they don't care how much you spend on it a lot of the time. Has that happened in your org? It's always been the case. So I'm like, I could hire one person at a killer salary, but they never have the dialogue, well, what if I hired 4 like intern level people? Couldn't I get more throughput that way? But anyway, different conversation. But I think having HR and finance align on a common view of headcount and cost is a key problem that knowing your people solves. And then the last one is building hiring plans that can combine headcount growth, turnover to ensure maintenance of required headcount. I'm sure you are doing this, right? Every organization has natural attrition, right? During the Great Resignation wave, we had a little bit too much natural attrition, right? I think we've had customers who looked at their headcount growth. They had to evaluate a reduction in force, but they didn't act on it because of the brand recognition, yes, but more importantly, natural attrition would have taken care of the problem for them. Numerous examples where actually the action you take is not whether you have headcount and turnover. The action you take is saying, can I make sure that I protect my company's brand and deliver, the insights so that they don't make silly people decisions. So we're changing the narrative, right? Like it's not about the metrics and the data. It's about the business problem that the data solves. Again, this is the most simplistic of examples. I think the challenge I have for you all to think about is saying, are we treating all of our projects this way? Are the insights we're creating going outside of the CHRO, outside of your organization to the frontline leadership? Because that's how we start to get influence. That's how the luxury bag starts to become affordable when everybody chips in a little cash. It's kind of the old story, like you can't buy a car without your partner being present, right? Like you need to have other stakeholders at the table. And when we talk about HR, I covered a lot of this, so I won't belabor the point, but it's also about how do we then start to connect all of your colleagues across the HR function. Now, this one, I think we're probably mostly there. If I should have actually shown this in terms of like 80% of people have the yellows done, maybe 70, 60%, 50 have the blues done. I don't know. Your organization might be somewhere on that journey, but everybody's at some level of maturity here of bringing the HR impact and connecting all of your HR stakeholders around this data literate approach. The last one's the one I want to talk about a little bit more. Business results. And someone asked this in the last session, but people data is the foundation. People data is the minimum viable product. People data is what we all probably have been focused on for the last 10 years of our careers in PA. Sorry, my mic's pulling here. But how many people are marrying work data with people data? You might be doing it, right? But I think this for people analytics function starts to become how you bridge that productivity gap. That's how you start to influence the business erosion crisis, to use our marketing team's words. And we do work in our organization to understand who are our top sellers. Pretty simple thing, right? Sales is kind of the best thing to measure performance against because it's binary. You either made your number or you didn't. That's not really fair, but that's how a lot of sales leaders think about it. So how do you pull in Salesforce data to connect the work that people do? Maybe you've got someone who's had some bad luck, has a bad territory, hasn't made their number, but is doing all the right things. Their pipeline generation is amazing. The gong call interactions where they're talking to customers are unbelievably good. The amount of outreach they're doing is unbelievable, and they're calling all the right people. So is that the person you let go? Sales leader might say, yeah, they didn't make their number, they're gone. But how do we as people analytics functions start to connect that work data with the people data? Because when my HR business partners come into me they bring me a 9 box and I adjust it because I don't think the HR data tells the whole story of performance and productivity. So as you think about it, how do you start to bring that business data into play? Again, some of you may be there, but this also is going to take a lot of work. Now you've got to interact with those enterprise analytics people. You got to work with your sales analytic colleague. You got to work with your supply chain analytic colleagues and start to bring insights to them that are driven on business data, not just people data. It's a hard job. Not all people analytics functions have the influence yet where they can go ask for that data and bring those insights, right? Has anybody done this work where you brought it to someone and they're like, yeah, thanks, not interested? Pardon me? It hurts. And you know, I think the challenge here isn't that you can do it. The challenge here is how do we start to get the respect and influence? And by breaking it down into action-oriented techniques and moving from a data analysis or a dashboard to this is what I've noticed and here's ideas on how to move is a step. And we've come a long way, right? Like I think people analytics wasn't a thing when we started Visier 14 years ago. And now look at this amazing event. So this is, I think, the future. The future is that work data, bringing it in together. AI is going to make that easier, but it's still going to take our influence to make it happen. So workforce data doesn't just mean you help measure impact. And again, marketing, it helps you create this edge. And the edge word is really important because companies that have the edge, companies that connect business data and people data together are going to get that productivity lift that they need so they can meet the unrealistic growth expectations that the world's placed upon us. And I think the companies that don't are going to struggle. And I know I want to be on the winning side. So I think, how do you start to connect people data and work data? So the Visier path, it's a thing. Your version of it might be different. You may have done good chunks of it. The point is how do you start to broaden the reach and expansion of what you do and connect it to the business outcome and an action that allows you to actually create the influence you need to get the luxury bag? And that's it for me.
We've got about 2.5 minutes for lunch, so we have got time for
You can either go to lunch or you can ask me a question.
Or you can ask Steve a question. Or you can find Steve on the Visier stand with your lunch and ask him a question.
Absolutely.
There's the other
Your
option
guys'
as
call.
well.
Yeah.
We've got one question here.
Why do you think 80% of S&P 1500 companies don't report total payroll and don't make any effort to communicate to investors a labor capital partnership?
That sounds like something way beyond my pay grade. I think it's about the comment I made about the trust that employees give organizations, right? So personally, I am actually okay with my salary being private. So I'm going to answer it in a roundabout way, but I think we need to get better at people data being transparent and being communicated. And if you roll that up to your question, it's because the data for people data and HR data and salary and how much I spend on people and what this gentleman makes versus this individual over here, it's all been very private. It's all been very sensitive. We didn't let it outside the halls of HR. And so I'm not really answering your question, but I do believe that there's this, I don't want to call it trust, but there's this expectation that that stuff isn't publicly available. And I think that leads to the mentality of keeping it, not reporting it, not being transparent about it. And depending on where you are in the world, I live in Canada. If you didn't get it from the accent, I'm from Toronto. We have to post that stuff now on every job description. California is the same, I think, right? And it causes a lot of challenges too. I don't know if you guys have had this happen yet where you post a role and someone who's in that role says, hold on, I'm not making that. So I think it creates a lot of challenges when the more transparent you are. And I think we as an industry need to just get better at it and be more transparent. So long-winded way to say I'm not sure. Anything else? 35 seconds.
There's lots of hungry people in here.
Amazing. Well, thank you very much for your time and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, Steve.